if your word count for each chapter is over 3,000 words, you're unlikely to be able to get readers on a weekly basis, because nobody is going to read more than 3,000 words a week of one post. They're just, unless you're really well known, they're not going to do it if you're an emerging writer. So the received wisdom, again, and this is to emerging writers, of your first serialization, is to get your word count to about somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 per chapter.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe 2.5 if you can get away with it, but I would say 1,500 to 2,000 and publish weekly. If you really can't do that and your chapter lengths are longer, 4,000 words, then consider posting every other week. For the memoir, they were 1 minute, so that was 300 words. So I could get away with posting every day. So you can see there's a sliding scale there, word length, how often you can post and how often you can expect people to read. But that, and then figure out how long it's going to take to do the entire thing. Because there's a certain fatigue happens as well. I think that's what happens. If you start posting before you're ready, it's all incredibly exciting. And about 2 months in, you just think, shit, I've got another 8 months of this and I haven't quite figured. It's a long time. It's a long time. That's why you really, really have to prep before you begin.
Yeah. So it sounds like it would probably not be a good idea to be like, I am going to write my memoir first draft on Substack and send it out.
Like I did. There's only one really good reason. I don't know if Simon Jones is on this call, but Simon Jones writes Triverse Universe, and he always argues with me about this, and I totally see his point. There's only there's two really good reasons to start publishing your serialized novel before you finished writing it. And that is if it's the only way to get that work up on its feet. So Simon found that he had this piece of work and he just could not finish it. He was procrastinating. He was doing something else. He knew it was a good piece of work, but he just needed a rocket underneath him. And serialization is a rocket. So he decided just to press publish, knowing that he didn't know where this was going. 246 chapters later, he's just about, but that's the other thing. It's about genre. So Simon writes speculative fiction, and he writes in a way that you might produce a long-running Netflix series that has micro plots within a major narrative arc. So he was able to stand up individual chapters that had a beginning, middle, and end within a greater whole that he could think about later that he hadn't really figured out. So those are the two good reasons. If structurally you're writing basically a mini series, and that tends to suit genre fiction, or if you just cannot get that novel finished and you need to put a fire underneath you, then do it. But if you do that, know that it's not going to be your best work and you will probably crash halfway through, which is fine because you will have got it going and seeing the problems. You'll have to pull it, and then you'll start again. Or like me, I just don't want anyone to read anything that I think is half-baked. So, that's the only, for me, when I teach, I'm teaching what I imagine to be literary fiction writers and memoir writers. And the very, very first thing in the class is finish the damn book.
Right.
Always.
Yeah. So I want to go back to paywalling for a sec, because I just had a follow-up question. And that is, if you've been writing posts on Substack for a while, you have, say, 1,000 or up to 5,000 people. So not like a huge following, but you have a following. They've been reading your free posts. Would it make sense to launch your book as a paid option for your Substack? Or is that still like, should you see what your audience thinks of that first? Like, what would be your recommendations around that?
You could see what your audience feel, but in all honesty, that's no guarantee they will follow through. Probably if you say, I'm thinking of launching this paywalled, what do you reckon? A load of people will go, great, fantastic. But how many that will translate into paid is quite another matter. Again, I'm going to harp on about it. It really depends on your ambition. If you want eyes on it, don't paywall it. But if you want to just experiment to see how many people would pay for your work, then obviously paywall it and find out. And you might find that you paywall it, you post 5 or 6 weeks worth of chapters, you find your engagement is just not enough for what your ambition really is. I mean, it might reveal what your ambition is. You might think your ambition is to see if paywalling works, but actually what you discover is what you really want is eyes on your work, and it doesn't work. So then you can just take the paywall down. Those kind of moments can feel a bit like, oh God, I've made a mistake. But the truth of it is, I mean, people notice initially, but they don't really notice. Do you know what I mean? I always say, in the best way possible, nobody cares. We're all just thinking about our own work, So if you make a decision and think, I've done that. I started paywalling my obsessive diary for a while. And then I took the paywall down again because I was just like, do you know what? The truth of it is, I just really love people reading my work, and I just wasn't getting enough people reading my work. So I might put it back up again at some point. I don't know. But yeah, always ambition, and mostly people want eyes on their work. That's what gleaned from this, last few years of talking to people. That's what gives you the thrill. And, if you do want an editor to see it, you absolutely have to put it out for free.
Right. Yeah. So I have a question about serializing post-publication. I don't know with anyone like that, but say someone has self-published a book on Amazon or on an indie publisher, self-publishing. Mostly I've seen it with self-publishing. And then afterwards, they start to kind of like serialize the book or excerpts from the book saying like, hey, if you want to read the whole thing, you don't want to wait for the next chapter to arrive, check out the link below and purchase your own copy. Have you seen people doing that?
Yeah, I'm doing that. I'm doing that with the memoir right now. Yeah, I think that's not a bad idea. I think that's exactly what he's doing. He's like, okay, how can I use this as a marketing tool? So I think Such a Pretty Fiction has been published traditionally, although I'm not sure. I'll have to check up on that. So I don't know what his conversation with his publisher was, if that's the case. But you're right, Adrian, a lot of people who choose to do it that way will have been independent authors and published it themselves. And they might think, yeah, I want to boost sales. So why don't I serialize it? You have to be very careful on proofs, obviously. It depends how long ago you published it, because I find invariably I'll go back and look at work and want to start editing it. So obviously you can't do that if you're selling it. It has to be exactly as you published it, because invariably editing it will improve it, and then that's not quite what you're selling. So I would just say be mindful of that. But that's exactly what I'm doing with the memoir. The memoir I put out, I serialized it. It was just really for me and to send to some friends, and that was fine. And then it sold well, so that was great. And then I was chatting with Hamish actually on a live, and he was like, put it back up. They should all be up. So I was like, oh, okay. So the only downside about that is that it is, as I'm putting it up again, it's going back into people's inboxes, some of whom have already read it. So sorry about that, everyone. But I'm sort of posting it periodically. But on that, as opposed to when I first serialized it, when it was just going out very, very plain, now when I serialize it, the masthead is my now existing book cover with all the blurbs. Beneath it is a link, buy the book, which goes directly to my website where you can buy the book in whichever territory you're in. And then a call to action to subscribe to me to support independent artists. So yeah, I think serializing after the event, why not? So, do you know what I mean? That's a slight difference there, but essentially you're just getting eyes on your work and, hoping that people will buy the book. But actually, just thinking about that, I'm planning on serializing just the first half of the book, and the recovery diaries, which are the second half of the book, I probably won't serialize. So yeah, that's the hook. If you want to read the rest of it, buy the book.
I'm working with one client right now who's re-serializing. He serialized on Substack and then self-published, and now he's re-serializing.
Yeah, exactly the same.
Yeah, but he's just doing excerpts with a voiceover for the second serialization, with a little bit of extra story in the voiceover part. So we're trying to trying out different things together and stuff. But it's really,
and is that successful in terms of
we're just starting the second serialization. So
yeah, I mean, that's a great idea.
Later.
Yeah, that's a great idea, and I think I think that works too. I think there are no wrong answers actually when it comes to this kind of marketing, like the serializing after the event. You could also, and I did this for Fallout before it was picked up, but you could do this after the event. I published companion pieces, so Fallout set at Greenham Commons, so I was able to publish, YouTube clips of the actual events that were happening where I set the novel. Or you can also, after the event, like now, hold live Substacks, live conversations with people and advertise it that way. So I think Substack offers all kinds of avenues for this is what we're talking about, for marketing your work before or after the event. And I think the Wise Author uses all of those because, it's a super busy world out there and there's a million things to read. And this is the other thing I always say, particularly to British people, but I don't know, maybe this applies across the world. They'll say, I don't know, should I post it on Notes? And I always say, look, no one else is going to advertise your book. Sweet Jesus, you post it on Notes, blow that trumpet every day if you have to, because you're the one doing it. So if you're serializing after the event, just go all out. Yeah. Do everything you can. Companion pieces, live events, Q&As is always another really... Yeah,
that's great. All right. So I would like to hear, I don't have a ton of questions because I don't have a lot of experience, but I would love to hear more about what you think is important for new Substackers, more that you have to share, and also some success stories that you found that you think is really great that people should check out as examples, like you were mentioning before.
Well, Sally Reed is the other one I always say, go and check out her work. Who else do I take people to? Jonathan Foster, I think. No, Jonathan Reed. I send people there. Ben, I send people there. Sam Suda. Success stories. Well, Kim Warner, her memoir Unfixed was first serialized on Substack, and that was picked up by the same publisher as me, actually, Empress Editions, which is very exciting. I'm going to the launch in New York. So these things absolutely do happen. I think one of the things that Kim did really successfully was that consistency of visual and word count. Obviously, her content, really added up to it as well. But it was a story that really hooked us all in. I think I started reading Kim Warner's memoir on Substack maybe 3 years ago when she was first serializing it. And I think back then we weren't even calling it serialization. She was just publishing her memoir. But there was a visual, I remember the visual element to it, which worked really well. And the same with Ben. I mean, I met Ben Wakeman just because his visuals were so good. And he does a great, what happened last week kind of run up posts as well. I've just been looking at my class I teach, and I've just noticed one thing that serializers need to be really aware of. And you have to be aware that there's a distinction. I'm going to read out this little clip I've got here. There will be a distinction between your email version of a chapter, its phone app version, and the version you hold on Scrivener or Word or whichever one you're using. The latter two you can change retrospectively, whereas the first you can't. And the offline versions can obviously flow into EPUB and KDP versions. So don't try and flow your Substack version into KDP or EPUB because it will be completely corrupted. And remember that if people are reading on their phones and they're reading on their laptops, and the formatting will be different. And that's the other thing that I've noticed when audios go direct to the RSS feed. Obviously, the audio will give exactly what's written at the top. So if you don't want the what happened last week bit of the story to be there, You can't do that. What you can do with Ben, what Ben did is, again, very well of each chapter in his audio, which really encouraged people to subscribe to him, explained what he was doing as an independent author, all that kind of stuff. So again, I know I keep going back to it, but you know, I'm just looking at my pages here. Your prep is absolutely everything. Yeah, and keeping it really simple. The other thing I always ask my students when they come to class to ask themselves for each chapter, I ask them, does each chapter move the story forward, deepen character, have the same approximate word count, and leave the reader wanting more? And so when you're in prep and you've divided it up into equally word counts of equal length, ask yourself those 4 questions, because you still have to think about it as a literary fiction or as a fiction writer, and make sure that it's hooking your readers in. Serialization is really, you know, it has to start with a bang and leave that, especially that end of that first chapter. What I always say is when I'm reading someone's first chapter, I want to almost fall off the cliff of their full stop at the end. Like, I'm still going and they're, whoa, stop like that, because that's what makes me want to read the next one. So that kind of rhythm and tension is even more important when you're serializing than when you're published, because at least, you know, if I'm holding your book and I've gone and bought it, I'm probably going to read the next chapter anyway. But if I've just read your first chapter on Substack, I've no reason to click on the same one next week unless you left me, you know, with a major sense of, I want to know what happens next. So you do have to be a lot more commercial, I think, in your thinking around your rhythm and your plotting. And those doing it, I think one of the things, and I noticed this with other Substackers who were serializing, like Sally Reed and like Simon Jones, and like Ben, although I think Ben wouldn't call himself a genre fiction writer.